Good morning to you, Megan. And so there's a lot to unpack here. Of course, we're going to dive into some of the specifics on these two companies here, Activision and Take-Two. Activision, kind of the giant of this space, the Call of Duties, all the different games they have on PC, the mobile department they have with King Digital. And so when you look at that, the thing, Megan, that we need to focus on first, though, is we got to look at this space as a whole. We talked about demand pull forward. Are we starting to see that on the macro trends as well?
Yeah, so, we've been following these gaming trends really since the beginning of COVID, the beginning of quarantine last year. And we saw this explosive growth. And so what we've been watching is, okay, when does this kind of start to taper off? When does this start to normalize? And we're definitely seeing that this year. When we look at mentions of, gaming as a whole, those are falling off significantly. I think another key element to look at when you consider this is obviously the growth rates that we hit last year. Those aren't necessarily maintainable. I don't think that that's news, but in general, generic gaming mentions are down about 9%, even compared with 2019 levels. So I think that this is something that right now, at least, people are, they're getting outside. They're starting to do, more social events. They're going to restaurants. Maybe gaming isn't at the forefront, especially not whenever you look at how things were last year. Right now, the only trend that we're tracking really in the gaming sphere that is showing, this year-over-year sustained improvement are these new to gaming mentions. But I think it is relevant that on a quarter-over-quarter basis, these are starting to cool down. We're seeing those new gaming mentions down about 15% quarter-over-quarter. So you're starting to see some normalization. Key takeaways here, obviously PC gaming and online gaming are performing a little bit better than just overall generic gaming and console gaming. So I think that you can start to apply this to the gaming realm and say, okay, we're starting to see demand cool down. Are there names, that are, following this trend? And then are there names that are outperforming this? And that's kind of the lens that we're approaching moving forward.
Megan, I mean, there has to be, common sense tells us that the amount of buying of video games has to slow down or dissipate, right? It can't go. Eventually, every game will be owned, and the only way to grow is to have new games. And I think that's what you may be seeing out of EA and Take-Two is the thought we have to get new games out there to these people. But what are you seeing? You just touched on something that I think is important. Are there some games or some type of games that are inelastic in their demand and keep consistent? And is there some type of games that are elastic and go up and down and fluctuate? What are you seeing in any trends in like individual parts of games?
So whenever we look at Activision and Take-Two, I would say both of those are really dependent on these new releases. Last year we saw Activision perform really well because they strategically released two different Call of Duty versions, one at the very beginning of quarantine and another one in November, right before the release of the new gaming consoles. So we saw these help to propel this demand. Take-Two did similar upgrades whenever the new consoles were released last year. But then you look at a name like Roblox, for example, and we see that one actually, I think it is right now pacing for 72% year-over-year growth or up. You can see over here, whenever you look at this, at least this is a 90-day moving average year-over-year. And you can see that Take-Two and Activision, those are facing really tough comps because they just don't have that, adoption spark interest that we were witnessing around this time last year. Activision doesn't have the new Call of Duty game that was released around this time last year. But then you have a newcomer, you have Roblox, who relatively new IPO, different type of concept, and it's still growing. It's actually pushing through all-time highs in 2021, even after a really explosive 2020. So I think that, obviously there's some tempering, there's some cool off in this game demand for Activision and Take-Two. And so maybe, if you're looking on a name to bet on, that may not be the name that I'm picking to, play significantly to the upside. Maybe I'm looking elsewhere in terms of, signs of strength.
Yeah, Megan, I think this is really, really interesting because I think first when we start the macro trends, You highlight some kind of more resilience within the PC and kind of online gaming. I would say that's probably the more competitive gamer, the one who probably plays on a more regular basis. They got the fancy computer. They're playing online versus others in a competitive landscape. We know that that's becoming more and more of even something that people view, whether that's through something like an Amazon Twitch, or even I've seen it, I think, on ESPN at times. So kind of the esports kind of growing. I could see that being a little bit more resilient. That's more than just a hobby for maybe the more serious gamer, but maybe the more fickle kind of flavor of the month. I did it because I was in quarantine. Summer's coming up, maybe I've been vaccinated, I don't need these video games anymore. That's the kind of the worry I would assume for some of these video game makers, is how do I get that kind of new participant to gaming, even though you said the new to gaming is still holding up there, but how do I keep them interested when they have all the other things they were doing come back online? Why are they going to still play these video games? So, Megan, is the number one thing maybe to watch when we see these earnings announcements, and maybe we'll check in again on one or two of these companies around then to see how well things held up?
Yeah, I think that that's going to be really critical. I think that the new game releases that especially Activision and Take-Two are pumping out are going to be key. We'll definitely watch these golf developments inside of Take-Two to see if it moves the needle. So far, it hasn't. I think another interesting thing, whenever you're looking at Activision and Take-Two, we often talk about these together. And if you're looking for one that's outperforming, it looks like Activision is a little bit better positioned than Take-Two. It's Call of Duty franchise, even though our mentions have it down about 6% year over year, the gameplay mentions are still about 160% higher than they were in 2019. So you've got a really solid franchise there, setting them up moving forward. But then whenever you look at Take-Two, we see some weakness, especially in their NBA 2K franchise, which is a really big, or previously has been a really big driver for them. So that's something to watch moving forward. You can see on this green line, this is Take-Two mentions, and this chart is kind of what I like to call it a Pac-Man chart, because it kind of, the way that the stock price is charted and the way that the green line, our purchase intent mentions, are charted, kind of look like the mouth of a Pac-Man. So that's kind of a sign of divergence, and that's definitely one that I may be a little bit more hesitant, especially in the short term, just because you see those demand mentions just falling off.
And so if I kind of sum things up here, and Megan, please correct and input anything or clarify anything that I misstate. Activision, its powerhouse in Call of Duty, arguably the number one franchise in video games, still kind of holding the lantern and keeping things, or holding the torch and still keeping things afloat, very much so for Activision, even with a little bit of a decline year over year. The numbers were just so incredible. It's just crazy to see that it's still holding up. Take-Two, on the other hand, without the major release, without something to get those eyeballs off Call of Duty, the Activision franchise, it's just starting to falter here a little bit, but the stock's not showing it. Is that kind of the takeaway, that Activision's probably a little bit more resilient because it has its powerhouse still doing okay, and Take-Two, with the lack of a release that really sparks interest, what is there to like right now?
Yeah, I think that you nailed it. While both are showing signs of cool down, it looks like Activision is a little bit more insulated because of the success of Call of Duty. And Take-Two is definitely one that we're going to be watching, especially through earnings. We'd like to see those demand mentions start to pick back up. We'd like to see some new game announcements, some new releases, something to get eyeballs and something to get players in their games. We've got a little bit of time before earnings, so it's going to be fun to see how this unfolds.